A hush lies over the castle, as though the stone itself breathes in slow, measured rhythms. Outside, the last traces of twilight sink into the horizon, and the great halls settle into their nocturnal stillness. The air smells faintly of beeswax and cool granite, and somewhere deep within, a single flame is coaxed to life. It flickers softly, casting a warm, golden pool upon the rough-hewn wall. The night watchman's gloved hand steadies the iron holder, the wax taper swaying gently with each step. Shadows gather in the high corners of the corridor, stretching and folding as the flame moves, like old sentinels bowing in silence. The faint scuff of boots on stone mingles with the whisper of fabric, the slow sweep of a woolen cloak shifting with the rhythm of his walk. At intervals, the candle's glow lingers over carved doors bound in iron, tapestries depicting hunts and feasts, their colors muted in the low light. Through each passing archway, the breath of the castle changes. The faint draft from a narrow window, the heavier warmth near the kitchens, the dry, book-scented air beside the library doors. His path is both routine and ritual, a quiet communion with the heart of the keep. There is comfort in the repetition, the circle of light before him, the darkness closing behind. When he pauses to trim the wick, the scent of warm tallow rises, curling into the cool night air. The flame flares briefly, then steadies, and he moves on. The castle sleeps in a deep, untroubled dream, each candlelit step weaving another thread in the unseen fabric of its long vigil until the night is whole.
Beyond the great oak doors, the night breathes differently, cooler, denser, as though the air itself carries the weight of centuries. The watchman lifts his candle, its flame trembling faintly as he steps into the western gallery. The floor here is smooth from years of footsteps, yet it carries a faint hollow echo beneath his boots. The tall windows are latticed with black iron, their panes ghosted with pale moonlight that glimmers against the candle's softer gold. The mingling of the two lights paints the walls in layers, one sharp and cold, the other warm and yielding. Tapestries ripple slightly in the draught, revealing fragments of embroidered gardens and rivers frozen mid-flow. Somewhere deep in the stones, the slow drip of unseen water keeps time, steady and patient. The watchman's free hand trails briefly along the carved rail of the staircase, feeling the worn grooves where countless others have rested. At the landing, he pauses to listen, not for danger, but for the castle's own breathing, the creak of timber settling, the distant crackle of the dying hearth, the faint contented snore of a stable hound 2 floors below. The candle's scent, sweet and faintly herbal from the tallow, mingles with the sharper note of cold metal from the sconces. When the flame wavers, it catches in the polished edge of a knight's helm displayed in the alcove, momentarily animating it with a spark of life before passing on. The gallery ends in shadow, but the watchman's path never falters. This journey is less about guarding walls than preserving their quiet, each step an affirmation that the night will remain unbroken until the morning bell. In the stillness of the inner keep, the corridors narrow, and the candlelight gathers close, pressing its warm hands against the ancient stone. The watchman walks here with softer steps, for the air is hushed in reverence. It is the place where the family's most treasured relics rest behind heavy doors. The flame reflects in the brass fittings, tiny suns in miniature, and each lock and hinge seems to hold a century's worth of whispered secrets. A faint aroma of cedar seeps from within the storage chambers, mingling with the smell of polished leather from the bindings of books stacked in a nearby study. The candle hums quietly, wax running in slow, deliberate rivulets down its slender form. Every so often, a cool breath drifts through the arrow-slit windows, causing the light to sway, brushing shadows along the walls like ink strokes on parchment. He stops before an ancient chest, its surface etched with patterns faded by time, and rests his hand on the smooth lid, not to open it, but to acknowledge it, as though the act itself is part of the unseen duties of the night. The flame hovers above the latch, painting it in gold, before he moves on past a suit of armor standing guard over the silence. The castle is more than walls to him, it is a living companion, breathing through its timbers, dreaming through its stones. By candlelight he tends not just to its safety, but to its dreams, keeping them whole until the sun returns to warm its bones. Down in the cloistered halls that wrap around the small inner courtyard, the watchman's candle is mirrored faintly in the windows that frame the night garden. Beyond the glass, frost has begun to silver the herbs and bare branches, while the fountain at the center murmurs in a low, steady song. The air here holds a faint green fragrance even in winter, as though the memory of summer still lingers in the soil. Each step along the flagstones is cushioned by the worn runner that softens the passage, its fibers holding the faint scent of lavender from the chambermaid's earlier tending. The walls, whitewashed long ago, catch the candle's light and send it in soft waves across the arches. His gaze settles briefly on the carved stone faces tucked in the corners, monks and saints whose features are softened with age, their expressions calm, almost drowsing. The silence is not empty here. It is filled with the gentle hush of growing things, even as they sleep under frost. When the watchman passes the small chapel door, he pauses just long enough for the candle to rest its glow against the iron-bound wood. The faint glint of gold leaf on the threshold catches in the light, before vanishing back into shadow. Moving on, he traces the familiar loop of the cloister, each circuit a reaffirmation that all is well. Above, the stars turn slowly in the deep blue, unseen yet felt, as steady and watchful as his own quiet patrol.
Through the servants' passage, the air grows warmer, carrying with it the lingering aromas of the day's baking, dark bread crust, a hint of honey glaze. The watchman's candle glows richer here, the gold deepened by the warm tones of the kitchen's timber beams. Copper pots hang in perfect rows, their surfaces catching fragments of light like small, sleeping suns. The great hearth is banked low, embers glowing beneath a blanket of ash, sending occasional sparks that drift upward and fade. The stone floor is cool underfoot, but the memory of heat lingers in the air. He moves slowly, his shadow stretching long across the flagged tiles, pausing to adjust the wick so the flame burns clear and steady. In the corner, a bundle of rosemary dries, its fragrance releasing gently each time the air stirs. On the table, a forgotten loaf rests under linen, its shape soft and rounded, like a pillow awaiting morning hands. The watchman's candlelight lingers here, as if reluctant to leave the comfort of the space. When he finally turns away, he casts one last glance over his shoulder, the circle of warmth fading behind him as he returns to the cooler, echoing halls. The quiet hum of the castle seems fuller after the kitchen's embrace, the night wrapping itself close once more as the candle leads him on. In the long eastern corridor, the candlelight must work harder to keep the shadows at bay. The ceiling soars high, its beams lost in the dim, and the walls are lined with tall portraits whose eyes glimmer faintly as he passes. The air carries the faintest trace of paint and varnish mingled with the older scent of stone kept cool for generations. The watchman slows here, his gaze lingering on faces from centuries past, nobles and stewards, some serene, others almost smiling. The flame dances over gilt frames, catching the edges so they flare briefly before dimming again. Outside the tall windows, the black sky leans close, and the glass carries back his own reflection alongside the candle's glow, as though the past and present walk together for this stretch of the night. At the far end, an ornate cabinet of polished walnut waits in a pool of shadow. He steps close, letting the light bloom across its surface, revealing inlays of pale ash and dark cherry wood, forming patterns like quiet rivers. He does not open it. His task is not to disturb, but to keep company. Turning back, the corridor seems longer in reverse, the portraits fading one by one until only the echo of his steps remains bound in the steady, breathing rhythm of the watch. The final circuit takes him to the great hall, vast and still beneath its timbered roof. The candle's light feels smaller here, swallowed by the high dark, yet it holds its own, laying a golden path across the long table. The rushes on the floor release a faint scent of hay and herbs as he walks, and the air tastes faintly of smoke from the earlier fire. At the hearth, the embers have settled into a gentle red glow, their warmth barely reaching the center of the hall. The watchman pauses here, letting the flame rest beside the old tapestries, their threads thick with the dust of years, yet still holding faint blues and greens under the flicker. The great chairs stand empty, their carved arms worn smooth where hands once rested. Above, the banners hang motionless, each bearing a crest whose colors soften into shadow. The watchman's footsteps are slow, unhurried. There is no urgency, only the completion of a ritual. When he reaches the far end, he turns, candlelight catching in the polished rim of a silver goblet left from the evening meal. The hall seems to breathe with him, its silence deep and even. With a final glance, he steps into the smaller passage beyond, leaving the great hall to its slumber, the night now fully gathered and whole under his care.